Welcome back to another episode of Just a Tip with Dr. Vic, Sex Nerd Podcast. Today we are going to have a rather titillating conversation with Carli de Ville, creator of Ask Carlos, a sexologist and psychotherapist who specializes in sex, kink, and BDSM education. And we're going to talk about sissification and strap-ons. Stick around. Welcome back to another episode of Sex Nerd Podcast / Just a Tip with Dr. Vic. I'm Dr. Victoria Hartman, and I am on today with Carli de Ville. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Absolutely.
good to see you again. It's been years.
I know, it's been forever since we saw. Actually, in my intro video on my YouTube channel, there's a clip of you and I like sitting on the little round bench just bullshitting, and that was so much fun at the time. But we were just cracking up, and I'm just like, I have to include this. I just have to.
I love it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. That museum is amazing. I am like dying to go back and see all the updates and see what's new there. And I'd actually go have fun because when I went, I was filming. So it wasn't like I got to really just like enjoy the way that you would if you were just visiting Vegas style,
Yeah. No, Vegas is definitely opened back up for the most part, and there's nonstop partying going on.
You know what's so funny? I was actually gonna move to Vegas right before the pandemic hit. So I had gone to, like, after I went over there and I met with you, I went back another time, and I was actually apartment hunting and everything like that. And then I think like a month or two later was when the pandemic hit, and it didn't happen.
Oh no!
I know.
Where now? Where are you now?
I'm in Austin, Texas.
You're in Texas, okay, right?
Yeah.
Move here. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the housing prices are not like they were 3 years ago. And us Las Vegas are going, are you serious right now?
Same over here.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I know my daughter lives in Texas, and she's like, oh, yeah, mom. Yeah, okay.
And that's more of a reason why we need to peg the patriarchy, right?
Let's actually launch into that. That's a really good segue. Mm-hmm. So our topic for today is going to be pegging. And I uploaded a pegging video, like, I don't know, it was a year or so ago, and it got huge traction and like I think I'm almost at 29,000 views. And I just felt like doing that topic that day. I didn't even like throw my face on or anything. I was like, sure, what? So obviously it's a topic of interest, and you have different ways of educating people. When I was in private practice and people come to me with what they considered like unusual interests, I tried to really work to normalize it. But tell me a little bit about, how you approach the topic and from an educational standpoint, and also just from a topic of conversation.
Right. So this is actually kind of funny now that I think about it. But when, so a little bit of a little bit about my background. So I'm a licensed counselor, and then I was getting a lot of clients that would come to me from other counselors who they were not comfortable talking about like sex related concerns. So I started taking on a lot of couples and working a lot with sexuality. And that's when I started, getting into sexology and getting certifications and education on that end. Right. But I was I was doing some like counseling at a local LGBT youth center here in Austin, and I had this one it sounds weird calling them client because I mean they're a teenager, but I had someone that I was working with, and it was while I was getting education on sexuality and stuff like that. So this one amazing sex shop here in Austin called The Forbidden Fruit, they have like an educational series, and they had one on pegging called like The Pleasures of Pegging or something like that. So I went over there to learn about pegging, and it's almost kind of like, it's a really fun like atmosphere where they teach you about pegging, they like show you things, and you're in a sex shop, so you get to like see and look and feel, and they have like alcohol and they have some snacks, so it's fun. So I went
Did they have
there.
live demonstrations? I only say
Unfortunately,
that because we've
no.
actually done some kind of live education at the museum in years past. So.
I was seeing, well, I think you guys get a lot more freedom to do things.
Well, yeah,
So
we had a special relationship with the ACLU at the time.
yeah. And in Texas, I mean, it was like, I think it might still be illegal to have like more than 6 dildos. So
Say what? What?
yeah, there's some obscenity laws in Texas that it's illegal to have like more than 6 dildos.
Can you
And that
imagine
particular
writing the legislation for that?
yeah, and that particular sex shop that I was in, they were kind of pioneered one, the sex classes here in Austin, but also they were fighting against that because they couldn't sell. There's like a percentage right now currently in the sex shop, in that particular sex shop, because of their location. They have to only have a certain percentage of like other related things and a certain percentage of things like dildos. Right. So it's a really weird environment, but I went there for that lecture or dicture, whatever you want to call it. So I was like sitting down, just kind of like minding my own business when I turn around and I see that client's parents who I met, because they're a teenager. So I spoke with them first and they walk in and I was just like, oh my God, like this is so awkward. And I was trying so hard not to, to give them their privacy and like respect that. And also it was like a weird conversation to be like, oh, hey, nice to see you at this pegging's anonymous, So the way it was set up, it was kind of like an aisle, and then they had 2 sections, one on the right, one on the left. They were sitting diagonally right behind me in the next row back. So every time that they would like pass the strap-ons and the harnesses to like pass around, I would have to grab it, turn around, and like hand it over to the husband. So it was so odd, and I was just like, well, I guess I know what they're up to this evening. Good for them, but when it comes to pegging and with clients, I do a lot of it's a lot of sex coaching and education. So with couples that have never, it's usually where maybe like one partner discovers that the other partner is into something, so they know nothing about it, so they come and they're like, what how do I do this, right? How do we get into this pegging situation? So I kind of first educate them on just the very basics of pegging, right? Especially if we're talking about like a biological, like cis female who is just like, they're like, well, how is it gonna work? Like, do I just go in and go ham? It's like, it's a little trickier because without, you don't feel the strap on, you won't feel the tightness of like the butthole clenching, like, oh my God, you're hurting me,
Right.
And sometimes what I've noticed with especially like hetero couples that are exploring pegging, and usually when you're talking about pegging, it's usually kind of like what they would consider like, oh, this is pegging, we're very hetero,
Right.
it's different than anal play.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of the times I'll notice that the boyfriend or the husband, they're not as verbal, as they don't feel as comfortable being like, oh, you're hurting me, or you're going too fast, or something like that. So the first thing that I remind them is like, you have to take it really, really slow and really get comfortable talking about things and communicating about all those weird things. Because that way, whenever it comes down to it, they won't feel uncomfortable being like, hey, can you go a little softer or go a little slower? So I always be like, the basics, use a lot of lube. Yeah. Let the person that's going to be taking that peg just choose the size and the shape, or whatever that they want to do. Right. And then really just go slow. I usually tell people, if they're going to be on the receiving end, that it's a lot easier if they're kind of like on top, if they're like straddling and they kind of like sit down on it, because they can control, how deep and how fast the process goes. Right. And they also kind of get a little bit of that control, so their hole isn't so clenched shut. They kind of feel a little bit more comfortable. Yeah. So I'll usually recommend that. a lot of communication, and most importantly, to have fun in the process. Because if they're not having fun, then they're not going to relax. Their holes are not going to relax. And that's usually when people get hurt. And then that first time, someone's really excited, like, oh, I'm so excited, I'm going to try pegging. And then in that first experience is not a good one. It almost taints their perception taints their perception of it. So then the next time they're afraid to do it, even though like it gets easier, more pleasurable, the more practice and the more comfortable that you are.
Right. And I think the other thing that some of the things that I noticed about especially hetero couples is there were some expressions of concern on the hetero male's part that, well, does this mean I'm gay? And I have to bite my tongue, because my inside reaction is, and so what if you are? But that's not what they're looking for. I try to like highlight, well, we're really sensitive down there, both, all of us as, human beings, and these are sensitive areas. So receiving pleasure in that form doesn't necessarily have to have a sexual orientation. Did you find that couples brought that up too, especially the het men?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's mostly, in my experience, it's mostly the girlfriend or the wife that is worried.
Really?
That means that their partner is gay. I feel like perhaps it's because if it's gotten to the point where the guy is comfortable saying like, hey, I want to be pegged, like bang me up the butt. At that point, I feel like they've already done some exploring. So they're a little bit more comfortable with their sexuality. Now, they might have had those thoughts in the beginning, and maybe even after, but I think for the most part, what I hear is usually coming from the girlfriend or the wife. That's like, oh my God, I'm worried that this means that my husband's gay, and that they're going to leave me to go get banged by some guy.
Oh, wow.
And it's rough. It's like, but you've obviously been banging since however long you've been dating. That with the person with a penis, the main pleasure spot, the prostate, is up there. Right. So of course it's going to feel pleasurable to them, regardless of, the gender. But if it's the gender that they're actually into, they're going to find it even more pleasurable.
Right. Mm-hmm. What's been interesting to me is the products. So I'm associated with the Deja Vu chain of sex toy stores, and
right.
There's so many products for people to choose from. There's one in particular, and I don't know if it's popular anymore, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, but it was insertable. And so let's say, for example, the female partner, person with the vagina, can insert it. And I think it seemed to me like that had its basis in sort of the aesthetic of, I don't want to have the straps on, I want it to be, but holding that in place and then trying to have anal sex with that. I mean, those that could pull it off, good for them. Those are some strong muscles, but for the most part,
they did their kegels.
They did kegels, right? But I think for the most part, it would seem like just having, reducing the potential for hurting someone, you have to have the stability of the straps, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because there's going to come a point, I think, where the penetrative partner is going to want to grab hips instead of wanting to like stress about holding the actual strap on in place.
Right, and I can just like plop off.
It just like pops out or goes in the wrong angle or what.
Right. I always tell people, like, for the most part, unless you're like a pro, go with the basics. The basics are structured certain ways for a reason, like the straps, or like with like anal, right? Like the base of the toys are flared out, so they don't go up there. And even then, you really do want like a nice taper and a nice flare. For example, if someone is using a butt plug while they're penetrating someone, I've heard numerous horror stories that while they're, maybe they don't find the right shape for them, while they're like going at it, the butt plug just like flies out. So it could be similar like that with those types of strap on. So that's why it's so important to, if you're starting out, go with things that are go with the basics, and then as you develop certain muscles, then you can venture off into other things. But when it comes to strap-ons, I always like encourage the ones that have, they're almost kind of like a double-sided. So I always think it's important for the other partner to also have their pleasure too. So whether that's a side that's also insertable for them, or they have some where they have like a little pocket so you can put the little bullet so you can stimulate the clitoris while they're penetrating, and they're using the strap on. I always think that's great. And also, I mean, one thing that people don't even notice, but don't even think about it, but even gay guys can use strap-ons to kind of have like a double penetration moment,
Yes, that is very true. And I did I don't know that I did necessarily, did I do an episode on it? I can't remember, but back when I was doing Baking Naked with my previous co-host,
Oh, I love
we
that
had
show.
we had
So
this
good.
we had this conversation, and I stumbled on it by accident. And so sometimes you hear like in the media or whatever, oh, porn star had to have their anal cavity constructed because it was so damaged from okay. So just to clarify for the audience, there is a subset of especially gay people
Oh
who
yeah.
do okay, that was that, so they
That's
their goal their goal is anal prolapse and rectal
yes.
prolapse, and so they do go for that particular end result. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're careful and you're sensitive to the partner who's receiving, it's, I don't want to say it's that's not going to happen, but it's highly unlikely that it's going to happen with regular beginners level pegging.
Right,
You know what I
right.
mean? We're not going to go from beginning level to, oh, my rectum is falling out. So
Right. I have a mangina now.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You're not going to have to wear a diaper if you're just base level pegging. It's you'll be
Exactly.
right.
Yeah, that is also one common concern
Okay.
for people starting off, that they're like, well, if I do this enough, like I've heard stories that I have to like wear a diaper, or that like
No,
that
you
it'll
have
just,
to go for that in order to
you have to really go for
you
it.
do.
And like,
Oh yeah. That takes
it's,
more practice than just your average pegging experience.
I know. I think if people can like look into some of the other things that people have put up their butts, some of the other toys. I mean, just go to a shop, and those big toys, they're not, I mean, yes, they're novelty, but they're not novelty toys. They're actual toys that people will use.
Yeah.
So even like the cones, the traffic cones that are huge, like people will put it all up their butt. So it would take something like that, to give you that. It's called it's called a rosebud.
Right.
Because
Right.
it comes out, the inside comes out, and it kind of looks like a rosebud because it's
Right.
red and fleshy, and like, you know,
But
so
that
it
even
would take,
that takes, you got to work up to that. Right.
exactly,
You
you
have
got,
to
and that is
really work
something
up to that.
that fist pigs, or people that love like getting fisted and things, they work up to that, and that's like their rosebud is their pride and joy, because this does not happen overnight. You have to really work to be able to get that prolapse, puckered up butthole,
Exactly,
so it's
yeah.
not just gonna happen from a hot night of getting pegged,
No.
or even like multiple nights of getting pegged.
No.
It takes some effort that not the regular person is just not going to go there.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's important to highlight, because a lot of people have a lot of fears around anal play anyway, and that's why we often still have these anal 101
I
talks
know.
and so forth,
Yeah. And just keep doing the Kegels. Like everyone can do a Kegel. It's not just for people with vulvas. Everyone can do a Kegel, and that will not only will give you a better orgasms, and but it'll also make sure to keep everything nice, and those muscles nice and tight in that whole area.
Right.
So, that's something that you're really worried about, then you can incorporate that, and it is kind of like a win-win.
Yeah.
Get a nice little tight butthole and better orgasms.
Exactly. Well, sometimes those two go hand in hand.
There you go.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important, especially to normalize these kinds of activities, because we human beings are incredibly sexually diverse in their sexual practices, and I think I would almost argue that pegging, because it's openly spoken of, is somewhat destigmatized, although not entirely, because people are moving towards, well, one would hope anyway. You never know with sexual behavior, but move more towards accepting people's desire for certain types of pleasure, and it's pegging is kind of up there as something that's more normalized. And
Mhm.
I think even Justin Laymiller, when he was doing his research into sexual fantasies, that was up there, as
Yeah.
a sexual fantasy.
Oh,
So
it is up there. I've talked to a lot of dominatrixes. I actually just uploaded a video on my YouTube channel
yeah,
where I visit a sex dungeon, a dominatrix in her sex dungeon.
yeah.
And I've had her, but I've interviewed a lot of dominatrixes on the show before. And every time I ask them, like, what are some like the top requests that you get? Like anal play is at the top, like getting like strap-ons or dildos. Those are like high up there. It's so high up there that I feel like almost 80 to 90% of the things that we went through involves some sort of dildo, some sort of contraption with some anal penetration. Oh, she had this great CBT chair. For those not familiar, CBTs for cock and ball torture.
Right.
And she had this great chair that she straps people onto, but she has a dildo on them, so she'll force the person to sit on the dildo while they're strapped in. But not only that, she also gets like a little mirror to put on their face so they can look at themselves while they're taking it. Just like, yes, yeah.
That sounds like it's a popular one for her.
It's very popular. And now like the strap-ons and the peggings with everything, it's just been in the news.
Yeah.
Like I was telling you about how like and I also made a video on my channel with Christina Aguilera performed at Pride, and during one of her performances, she was wearing a Hulk like costume, and she was wearing this huge like diamond encrusted green
Yeah.
dildo, green strap on with balls and everything. And it was pretty sizable. So, that's been in the news. And then lately, with everything that's been going on with the abortion rights, there's been, there was this funny meme that I was going to send you. Let me see, right? I got it right here, which I thought it was hilarious. So it's like pegging, 0% pregnancy rate. So it says, we're coming for your butt. The only safe way to have sex with men now.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We're gonna start. Making memes about what normally people would like be hush hush about post row. So
Yeah.
yeah. No, you know what? Actually, I can remember. Well, and maybe it was the who they are at the time, but I went to Nine Inch Nails concerts constantly in the 90s,
I
and
love it.
uh Marilyn Manson used to open up for Nine Inch Nails, and his opening show during one of the tours was this giant black strap on that he would run around stroking while he was singing. But I'm just kind of like, well, that's us Gen Xers, we're weird anyway.
Yeah.
There was more like, oh, that's really hardcore and kinky, and now it's just like, hey, let's have these at Pride.
Right.
Run around with dildos at Pride. But I think it's a really great form of self-expression and normalization. So
I think so too.
you know what? Yeah, let's normalize sexual behavior, because we're and you know what? And I talk about this all the time on my channel. When I was still in private practice, the overarching theme of everyone that I saw as a therapist was, I just want to be accepted. I'm into this
Yes.
stuff, and I just want to be accepted, and not seen as some kind of dangerous degenerate
Right.
because I like these things. And it's nice that certain things are, more in the mainstream now, because that's how they're normalized. It's just the way that it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I'm still do clinical type work, so I hear that all of the time, where people are afraid to tell their partner about some of the things that they're into because they're afraid of like rejection or like humiliation, and not in an erotic way, right?
Oh,
like
right. Yeah. In
not
the
the type
not
of
fun way, right?
in a
Yeah,
non-fun way. Yeah, they're so worried about it. And a lot of the times they end up seeking outside of their commitment to get those needs fulfilled because they just feel so ashamed to talk to their partner about it, where they would so much rather prefer to do it with the safety of their partner. And like, once you're able to communicate like those deep, dark parts of you, that you're so ashamed to tell anyone else, that connection and that bond is just like so strong. And it, like, I've seen couples go from being on like literally on the brink of divorce to being like stronger than ever because they were able to open up and be accepted for some of those things that maybe they just did not feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, and I had a fellow scholar make me aware of this recently, and I've really kind of leaned into it. When we, and I've said this on my channel before, when we date, we kind of set parts of ourselves aside, because let's say we get really along with this person and we really like them and they're good company and stuff, but we're like, okay, I don't want to scare them off with my weird freaky sex thing, right? And so then you're like down the road 5 years and there are things you can't share. And one of the things that was pointed out is our 3 orientations, which 2 we're arguing about a little, we're disagreeing on in scholarly works, but our erotic orientation, our sexual orientation, and our relational orientation. And if we can be open with that person about all 3, because I think starting off and having compatibility in those 3 really is indicative of a long-term success in a relationship. And instead of having to hide, because you're right, we don't like to admit it, but sex and money really are the 2 things that drive people apart when they can't find a way to connect and be compatible. And we don't like to, we like to, some of the more, I guess, conservative therapists are like, well, sex isn't the most important. Yes, it is. It is one of the most important ways couples connect. If they're both asexual, that's fine. If they're both into kink, that's fine. But when you have that disparity, like you said, if you can't open up to a partner, you fall apart.
It's hard. Yeah. That's why I always tell people, like, as odd as it may seem, like, at least by the 3rd date, you should be talking about sexual compatibility. Because if that point crosses and you haven't yet talked about that, it gets harder to share because you're start getting more emotionally invested and start thinking more concerns of like, oh, I really want them to like me and I want them to fall in love with me at this point. So I don't want to say anything that might like make them run for the hills. But then it's like, well, you're doing everyone a disservice, because if you're keeping that from them, at some point that's going to be something that you're going to want, that you're going to need, and something that you're going to desire. And then you're going to be too afraid to even mention that. So you'll probably keep it a secret. And then by the time you finally reveal it, then they're upset because, wow, how dare you been keeping this from me? Especially if it's something that they're really against, right? Like,
well, and it gives
find out in the beginning.
Stick around, right?
Exactly.
Because if you're not, and it's not that anybody is wrong, it's that you're either compatible or you're not.
Or you're not.
Find that out early so that each of you can release the other one to find someone you're compatible with.
Right.
And you don't want to navigate that disappointment. Nobody wants to, you meet someone, you like them, and you don't want to be disappointed, like, oh, another failed, short-term relationship. But I don't know that you should look at them like that. Right. It's more like, let's discover whether or not we're really compatible and invest the time, because that way we're not wasting it.
And those first few dates are like job interviews almost, right? Like they're like job interviews. It's like, these are the things that I have to offer to the table. What do you have to offer to the table? Do we match? Do we line up in those regards? And not just for sex, but also for like really important like moral and values and beliefs and attitudes. Like, you should get all that figured out like really early on, because if not, you're just wasting everyone's time. And that is the one thing that everyone gets really upset about. Like, oh my God, I can't believe I spent like 4 years with this person, and then I find out that they want me to bang them up the butt with a dildo, and that's not what I want. It's like they get so angry for something that they could have just figured out date number 2, like, oh, well, you're really nice, I love talking to you, maybe we can bang it out, but it's not long term.
Right. Yeah, we'll hang for a while, but a partnership, no, because of the compatibilities, right? Yeah, exactly. And we're afraid to say that. you know, because we don't want to disappoint and we don't want to be
Mm-mm.
disappointed. But again, you're doing a disservice by not being straightforward early on and just not
Yeah.
wasting someone's time.
And like you said, those things are so important.
Oh
There's
my
a
gosh.
difference between, I mean, we all like, maybe if we hate country music, with the person that we're dating in the very beginning, we're like, oh yeah, we love country
Yeah,
music.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
afterwards, we're like, I don't really care for that.
Yeah, yeah,
That
yeah.
is not, for most people, that's not going to be that much of a deal breaker. It'll be something that a lot of people will be able to move past. But things a little bit more serious, like sexual compatibility, that is just going to be really, really difficult to move forward with.
Right. I agree. So what would you well, let's just, go, you've already made some suggestions. Um for those, for, well, let's say that one partner isn't into it and the other partner is, which is the challenge, and
Yeah.
doesn't want to experiment. Where do those couples go? I mean, we just talked about the extremes of breaking up and divorce, but let's say it's a long-term couple who's been together for 20 years. They have family, they're financially invested and so forth. And you have
Mhm.
one that's kinky and one that's vanilla. How do they navigate that?
I always tell people the first thing that you really want to do is, before you write anything off, and granted, I know that maybe like you hear, if you're not into pegging or whatever, and you hear that your partner wants to be pegged, the first thing is to be like, oh no, like I don't want to do this.
Mhm.
There's usually something in the background of why you don't want that, and you also start thinking of things like, oh, this means that they want to be with someone with a penis, or like, I don't like that if I start pegging them, maybe I won't be the submissive partner in the relationship anymore. Like, I don't want to be the dominant one, I want to be the dainty one. So I don't like this, I ain't gonna do that. So you already have, like, they have all these preconceived notions of what that means. So the first thing I tell everyone is, like, especially for the person who has a desire that they're going to talk to their partner about, is become an expert, not at just what you're into, because you probably already somewhat, you're you're
Yeah,
already an
you've been
expert in that.
experimenting. Yeah.
But become an expert of why you're into that. What about that particular activity, kink, fetish, or whatever? What about that is what turns you on? What about that is what excites you? What makes you want to do it, especially with your partner?
Right.
Because then when you talk to your partner about it, you can already just start, you want to take the guesswork away from the other person, because the more informed they are of your intentions and your fantasies and your desires, the less they're going to be jumping to their own conclusions of
Right.
why you want to do that.
Right.
So like, let's say that partner is maybe like a little bit more submissive and they just want to stay submissive, and they're just thinking like, oh no, this means that they want someone who is more dominant or whatever. They can explain what they like about being pegged, and like, in a way that makes sense to their partner, and will calm some of those fears of like, okay, maybe I can do the pegging and still feel like the submissive partner,
Okay.
like, so there's a lot of workarounds. Now, if you've already talked to your partner, you've explained to them like why, usually with something like pegging, it's because it feels good, it's going to
Right.
feel very pleasurable. Sometimes it comes into like a power thing, like the whole, maybe that giving that control over to someone. And for someone with a penis, oftentimes it's like, giving my whole away to you, it's like my biggest form of submission.
Right.
And they're really into femdoms and things like that.
Right.
So everyone is just going to have a different reason for why they're into it.
Mhm.
So become an expert at the why, so you can inform your partner. Once your partner is very well informed, then a lot of the times, once they understand, and all of those fears that they initially had that usually have nothing to do with what they wanted,
Yeah.
they're a little bit more like, okay, well, maybe we can give it a try. Maybe we can see, we can talk a little bit, like they can think of it from the other person's perspective, and then decide like, okay, we can try this out. If it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. Or if they are just like, nope, that's so not happening, then, that's when you start thinking, one, if the compatibility, right?
Yeah.
Like the long-term compatibility,
Yep.
and what that means. Do they want to stay, or do they want to do things to maybe like open things up if that's
Right.
something that they're interested in, or if it's going to be one of those things where like they just give their partner that alone time to, they can buy them a chair with a dildo on it and
Right,
be
right,
like,
right, right, right.
Merry
Find a
Christmas.
workaround.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, and these are all the conversations that are important to have, because yeah, how are you going to navigate that going forward? I agree with you that all of those are necessary, because the one option I think that folks, and I don't like using the word should, but should avoid, is one person's sexual preferences or sexual fantasies being shut down permanently.
Right.
It's
Hmm.
yeah.
And it's also a great time for doing like a little negotiation, a little give and take.
Yeah.
Like, okay, we can do that for you.
Right.
Now, what are we gonna do for me?
Right.
Where you get to each explore different parts of your sexuality and parts that you have never explored
That, yeah, that
together.
you might not even know
Yeah,
of, and what's that going to do to supercharge the relationship, right? Because I've seen that it can,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, you feel safer with the person once, like,
Absolutely.
even just the process of trying it out, like having someone who's willing to go there with you,
Right.
and you're going to be willing to go somewhere with them, even if it doesn't work out, there's that safety that you feel from that. So even if you guys decide to split, it'll be a lot more amicable than just like, oh my God, this is gross, I'm not gonna do that, I'm not gonna bang you up the butt, like.
Yeah. You want to keep judgment and shame out.
Right, yeah, you want to honor the relationship, but you obviously have a good connection, you've obviously like been together x amount of time and have been there and supported each other through all these ups and downs, like honor that. Just because someone likes pleasure, or like, who doesn't like pleasure? So
Exactly.
just because someone finds pleasure from a part of their body that's designed that gives them pleasure,
Yep.
like you can't just insult them for that.
Exactly. I agree.
I mean, you can, but you shouldn't.
Well, you shouldn't. I know you shouldn't. You shouldn't. No.
Unless they're into that, right?
That's a whole other. That is a topic we're going to follow up with.
I know. Erotic humiliation is a
I
hot
know,
topic for sure.
right? Yeah. But we are getting close to an hour of conversation already. It's passed so fast, and I think that's a really good note to end on, is the let's not shame, let's actually kind of let's be adventurous explorers of
Yes.
the erotic, including and importantly our partners and where they're coming from. So
yeah, and then maybe you'll all come, right?
yes.
Hopefully, yeah, you'll laugh, live,
we're gonna
come.
laugh, live, and come. Yeah, I know. Well, I am so glad that we got to chat about this particular topic today. And I am going to end my podcast on that note, because it was really lovely. Thank you guys all so much, guys, gals, and non-binary folks, for tuning in with me and Carli de Ville today, covering the topic in a little bit more of an expansive form of pegging. And with that, I will see you all next week.